One. We're going to go ahead and get started. Feel free to take a seat. We have plenty of seats. All right. Hey. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started, everyone. Good afternoon. Yeah, I don't want to spill on this thing. I think we're good. All right. So good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. My name is Laura Noble, and I'm the founder and executive director of the William F. Buckley Jr. program at Yale. Thanks. I'm delighted to welcome all of you to the second of 3 events we're holding during the Yale Alumni Reunion Weekends. Before I introduce our speaker for this afternoon, I want to say a few words about the Buckley program. The Buckley program is an organization dedicated to promoting intellectual diversity at Yale. Throughout the year, we host lectures, seminars, firing line debates, conferences, and much more. Our over 500 Buckley student fellows have a wide range of political beliefs, but they all stand united against the formation of a liberal-only echo chamber, especially at a university where the mission is the cultivation and creation of new knowledge. Buckley fellows believe that all perspectives must be heard and examined in good faith. You can learn more about the Buckley program by visiting buckleyprogram.com. It's no secret that in recent years, viewpoint diversity and free speech have been major concerns on college campuses across the country and at Yale in particular. Our newest initiative, Fight for Yale's Future, has recently launched a petition calling on Yale to reaffirm its commitment to the free speech principles of the Woodward Report. The Woodward Report celebrates the right to think the unthinkable, discuss the unmentionable, and challenge the unchallengeable. We already have over 700 signatures on this petition from students, faculty, and alumni. And so if you haven't already done so, I hope you'll sign the petition and spread the word. And now I'm excited to introduce our guest, Heterodox Academy President John Tomasi. Prior to his current role, John was at Brown University, where he held a position of Romeo Elton 1843 Professor of Natural Theology and taught and wrote about political theory and public policy. At Brown, John was twice awarded university prizes for excellence in undergraduate teaching. He founded and directed the Political Theory Project, an independent research center at Brown that supports scholarship and encourages political dialogue on campus. John earned his bachelor's degree from Colby College and did his graduate work in political philosophy at the University of Arizona and Oxford University. He has held positions at the University Center for Human Values at Princeton, the Department of Philosophy at Stanford, and the Safra Center for Ethics at Harvard. John is the author of Liberalism Beyond Justice, Citizens, Society, and the Boundaries of Political Theory, in which he proposes a reconception of contemporary liberalism that takes diversity of views more seriously, leading to less emphasis on the public aspect of society and developing a liberal conception of non-public life. His latest book, Free Market Fairness, draws simultaneously on moral insights from defenders of economic liberty, such as F.A. Hayek, and advocates of social justice, such as John Rawls. Free market fairness is a new theory of liberal justice committed to both limited government and the material betterment of the poor. We had the pleasure of hosting John for a multi-day seminar with students over spring break in 2020, right before the world shut down. So we're delighted to have him back with us once again, this time for a talk on Great Minds Don't Always Think Alike, Viewpoint Diversity in Higher Education. This topic is, of course, near and dear to the mission and activities of the Buckley program. John will begin with some remarks, and then we really look forward to hearing your questions. So please join me in giving John a warm welcome.
Hi, I'm not sure whether to bring coffee or water, so I'll bring them both. I know some of you are drinking stronger stuff. I think I'll just first start by saying that, just to pick up something that Lauren mentioned, that I came to the Buckley program. I was invited to spend a week. Was it a full week? 4 days? 3 days. Yeah. 3 days. I was invited to spend what struck me at the time as a ridiculously long amount of time in the Buckley program for what seemed to me a ridiculous assignment, which was to teach a pretty dense book in political philosophy to Yale undergraduates during their spring break. And I thought to myself when I saw that invitation, are you people serious? Do you actually have a clue of how students work and think? You actually want me to come there and offer 3 days of deep philosophy to undergrads during their spring break? And I was, having spent some of my life with younger people, pretty confident that I knew better than Buckley did this was a bad idea. And I was amazed, genuinely amazed. How many people came? 20 Yeah, I would have said 30, but some number that shocked me. And then what was really interesting to me was they actually had read the readings. and then the real shocker was like this COVID thing started to hit, and they had to go back to their dorms to pack up or something like that. And then they came back the next day to go to do chapter 7. And I was like, anyway, so that says some wonderful things about Yale students, but it also says something I think really remarkable about Buckley, that Buckley had built, as I saw it as an outsider, the kind of community where people would think it was a reasonable thing to ask of them to spend part of the spring break talking complicated ideas, and that the students rose to the occasion, and despite even COVID, would come back to keep doing it. So great respect for Yale, and great respect for Buckley. Okay, so my talk to you. I'm gonna go through sort of make 4 points, and then we'll have some conversation. So I'll just do it that way. And the first point is a point that I'm just going to assume is of interest to you. Maybe I should ask you. Would you like to? Yeah, I'll ask you. Am I right to guess that most people in this room would like to see Yale's culture become better in some important ways? Better, for example, in ways to do with being a more respectful place for the individual views that students have, more respectful, for example, of the principle that young people we have an obligation, those of us who teach and work in universities, to give students the opportunities to think for themselves. Am I right to think? So I think that too. And my first point to you is that if you think that way, that I bring you words of hope. But I would qualify, though, that I think it's worth that you, if you feel that way, that you look into your soul and decide whether, in fact, what you're interested in is something like what I just said, that is, improving a culture at Yale so that students have that opportunity to truly think for themselves. Is that what you want to see happen? Or, maybe mixed up with that, do you just want to stick Yale in the eye? Do you want to get Yale back for some of the indignities that you felt through your life as a Yalie when they say things about like, what most recently happened at Yale, some Halloween or whatever it would be? There's a big distinction, I think, that alums need to look inside to think about, to detect where they are. And there's a big difference between wanting to stick your university in the eye. I know, believe me, I know the feeling. But also between that and actually wanting to improve the place. And I'm going to talk about the improving on the improving side, because I actually think I know a way that you can do something to improve Yale's culture in the ways I described. So that's what I'm going to be talking about. Second point. The second point is that in the process of change that I'm going to be describing, the key players are faculty. I know. You've read the statistics. I don't know what they are right now for Yale, I've forgotten. But I can guess what they're like. If you just do voter registration records, which people do, it's probably pretty grim. I still vividly remember I was teaching at Stanford very happily, but then for a variety of reasons, shifted east to go to Brown. And I think my third year at Brown, I remember getting a phone call in my untenured office. And it was some young person out in Los Angeles who was conducting one of these voter registration polls of the Ivy Leagues. And they said, so, John Tomasi, that's not my name, but so John Tomasi, we see that you're a registered Republican. And as far as we can tell, you're the only registered Republican in the humanities or the social sciences at Brown. There was one economist who retired, and they said, we just want to check before we run these stories about this. Do you know of any others? So I said, can I just close my door? So I know when I say the faculty are the key, I'm aware of the material that we're working with, if that's the key, right? But I would say, and more seriously, that the faculty are the key because faculty are the ones who control their own classrooms. Faculties are the only ones, who can really determine what kind of an environment students are going to experience, not just when the speaker comes through, though there's a role for that, as I'll be saying soon enough, but experience in the deep way where real change happens, where real learning happens, where real mentorship happens. Faculties are really the only ones, never mind the deans, faculties are the only ones who could provide the experience to people that could change a life, the experience of a full semester or a series of semesters with people who actually are constructing their classroom in a way that's visibly designed to respect students as free thinkers. So faculties are the key in that important way. I guess I'd also say that that faculty, presidents obviously are really important, but presidents come and go. Undergrads are important too, but God knows they come and go. I think of students as being like little plants, no offense to the students here, quadrennials perhaps. They only last for 4 years and we transplant them out into the real world. But in these 4 years, they're part of this, oh, thank you. I'm not sure I'm gonna actually use these slides, but so there's students who are, presidents matter, students matter, deans are always trying to matter, no offense to the deans in the room. Well, actually, what the heck. But the faculty are the ones who matter the most, in part because faculty are the ones who live at the university longest. Faculty are the ones who spend typically 20, 30 years at a place, even more sometimes. They are the ones who also have the local knowledge of what the place is really like from the inside. Faculty are the ones who, if they chose to, if they could be stirred up to, if they could be equipped to become change agents, they're the ones who are uniquely situated to become agents of change. So that's my second point. And my third point is going to be a little bit longer. My third point is just to tell you about an experience that I had at Brown that may surprise you. There are days when it surprises me. But at Brown, 17 years ago, I went back to my office, and I was surprised to find these two students waiting for me, Rob Sand and Stephen Beal. They're both juniors. They're people I'd known since their freshman years. They both took a very large lecture class at Brown, Introduction to Political Thought, and they'd both been in that class in the fall semester. I still remember one of them. I still vividly remember the first time I laid eyes on one of these two people, because I was looking out at this big audience, about 500 people, and there was this one really tall, really awkward-looking kid way in the back with the worst haircut I ever saw, biggest eyes I ever saw, doing like this to me from the seat way back there. And I remember just as I was lecturing and talking, so I'm glancing over all these people, seeing that one person, think to myself, my God, he's going to have a hard time in the dorms without a haircut. I just felt so bad for him. But these two kids, now they were juniors, were outside my office waiting for me. And they were, as I said, an extremely unlikely couple, because by now, by their junior year, they become known as they're probably the two most politically prominent students at Brown. Each of them was the writer of one of the two most celebrated opinions columns at Brown. One of them, Stephen Beal, the guy with the really big eyes and the really bad haircut, was the most prominent defender of the Democratic Party platform at Brown. Really beautiful essays, really carefully written, brilliant. It turns out, by the way, that Stephen Beal was a supermodel. So he was actually literally would go off flying to places like wherever, Milan, and he'd walk around with clothes, and if they chose him, they'd give him a whole bunch of money, and a haircut, which he had, was given to him by someone with a first name, not his mother. But anyway, so this person was an extremely popular person at Brown for all kinds of good reasons. And he was also, as I said, the most eloquent defender of the mainstream ideology at Brown. His colleague had a normal haircut and was a less popular person on the Brown campus at that point. He was the person who, with courage and with intelligence and creativity to equal that of his colleague, would write columns on a regular basis in the Brown Daily Herald about just defending mainstream positions from the then Republican Party platform. So this was the kid who would write the essay about why premarital sex was wrong and then try to get a date on Friday night. This is the kid at Brown. This is the kid who would write their essay about why gay marriage was wrong. He'd just take them on, and as I said, he'd do it brilliantly. At Brown, as you probably know, students don't have to take anything unless they want to. There's no core curriculum. But what's more, you may not know, at Brown, if there's a course you want to take that's not being taught, you can design your own syllabus, find some professor to sponsor it, and have the course taught for credit. I'm just saying, I didn't make up the rules. It's just where I taught for a long time. But they'd come to me, these two people, here's the important part, finally. They'd come to me, these two people, because they'd been quietly meeting to design a course that they both urgently felt should be taught at Brown, but wasn't being taught. And the course was called Knowing Right, Conservative Thought in America. And they had the idea, these two people, that they'd never had a chance in their coursework at Brown to learn in a sustained way why any intelligent person might be a Republican. And for the very different reasons, they wanted to find out. And so they designed that course for me, and I started talking with them, and with them as my inspiration, I started building something. But the one thing the really important point I want to share with you was something that one of the two students, the one with the bad haircut, said to me. He said, I said, why are you doing this? I said, thank God, thank you for being here, but why are you doing this? And he said to me, I didn't come to college merely to become a more skillful defender of some inherited ideology. He didn't come to college, right, merely to become a more skillful defender of any inherited ideology. So what did he come to college for? Well, we talked about it for a while before I lost them. The other students came in and took their places, but we talked about it for a while, and we sort of developed the idea that at college, I think, one of the things we're trying to do, is certainly those of us who work in the area of politics and economics and history, one of the things we're trying to do is give young people, the opportunity to be leaders, not just skillful defenders of some inherited ideology. What does it mean to be a leader? Well, something like, there's different ways, right? You can be the leader of a platoon already formed. That platoon can be marched down through history to you. It can be the platoon of the existing Republican Party, the Democratic Party, and you can take your appropriate position as a leader of that platoon. That's the kind of leadership, I guess. A more ambitious kind of leadership is something like being the kind of person who seeks to build bridges where chasms exist. And if you think of leadership that way, as trying to build bridges where chasms exist, you'll notice immediately that the only way you could plausibly do that with any kind of hope of success would be by actually going to the other side, scouting it out, and actually learning what's over there in a sympathetic way. If you haven't done that, you're probably going to build a bridge and then can be too strong. But if you did that, or had the chance to do that, maybe you could do something kind of remarkable. So with that guiding idea, that students maybe didn't just come to campus, to college to become skillful defenders of inherited ideologies, I built this organization called the Political Theory Project. And my first step was to find 3 faculty colleagues to help me do it. And so I had my 3, which is an incredibly important first step, and it's going to be directly relevant to what I'm going to say to you in a couple minutes. But that key step was to have some faculty with me to do it. Now, the 4 of us we met, it turned out the 2 of us, when I told them what I wanted to do, like start hiring postdocs, start bringing new classes to Brown. At Brown, by the way, like I said, there's this weird paradox at Brown that if you want to change, nothing's required. They can just take whatever they want. So if you want to change the curriculum at Brown, it turns out, interestingly enough, you don't need to go to a committee and convince them to add some good stuff to the curriculum. Nope. All you need to do is find some way to add some new products to the shelves. You add the products to the shelves, and at Brown they do a shopping period, which they make a big deal of, and students shop the courses. And if you add courses to the shelves that the students find of interest, courses that are designed intentionally to show our respect that we have for students and their will to think for themselves, then you'll find, I found, that you'll start out-competing with the other courses, especially if you hire people and incentivize them so that if they get big classes because they teach them so well, they get a little extra money on the research accounts. But anyway, there's ways to encourage the right kind of virtue, encourage virtues of people by adjusting incentives. But that organization, the Political Theory Project, the main emphasis was on the curriculum, finding ways to hire people in different fields who are truly committed to respecting students' ability to think for themselves and their capacity and their desire to think for themselves. And among the things we did was along with once I had my faculty group, we built a student group, which what I call the Janus Forum, Janus for the Roman god with 2 faces. And we built a steering committee that was representative of Brown's political diversity. I do mean representative. So for example, the rule was that any student group that claimed to have an interest in politics, by our bylaws, would have the right to send 1 representative onto the steering committee. So we had representatives from the Brown Republicans and the Democrats, from the Gay, Lesbian, Transsexual Alliance, and from College Hill for Christ, for the Marxist Student League, the Socialist Student League, the Green, the Brown Greens. I could list 20 of those, and then Students for Liberty and ISI, and so we had this group of about 24 students. Each one of them, by the way, leaving their bunkers of the Brown Greens with their great plan to launch some new bins for recycling in front of people's doors or whatever it was that week. They would leave, and whatever the Students for Liberty would put stickers of like a American flag somewhere. That was their idea. Who knows, something like that. Whatever their activist plans were for that week, they leave all that behind every other Sunday night and come to the Political Theory Project. I put food there, Chinese food, just to lure them to the site. And talk about something different, that is talk about the university, to talk about the quality of the conversations on the campus. Were they truly, was Brown having a place for brave conversations? Was Brown a place that was open, a place for open conversations? And what could they do as people who are like denizens of that place now? What could they do as individuals and then now as a group to change Brown, to improve Brown, to make it better in those ways? And among the various things we did was we did a bunch of different pieces. The courses that I said were always my main underlying interest, but we created something called the Janus Lecture Series, which is the biggest lecture series at Brown now. We typically hold them 1 a semester, sometimes 2 a semester, but typically just 1 a semester. And these would be mega events. And that steering committee that would meet every other Sunday night, they had a lot of responsibilities, and I gave them a budget to do things that they found interesting, so they would feel ownership and actually know how to make Brown better. And they come up with all kinds of crazy ideas I can tell you about if you're interested. They had lots of wacky ideas they came up with that I knew were bound to fail, but I funded them anyway because they were their ideas. I wanted them to feel what that was like to see failure happen right up close and personal. Should I tell you a couple of those? Well, I'll just give you a couple of them. A couple of my favorite ones. Well, this one was actually it's not facially moronic idea, but their idea was what they called it food for thought. So they came to my office, a bunch of them, with the idea we want to do food for thought. And food for thought, the concept was once a week they would table slip the breakfast dining halls with facts, a bunch of different facts on some topic. So, for example, the first week they did it, they chose to do incarceration in America. So they picked out whatever was 25 different facts about that, cut them onto little slips of paper, and littered the dining halls, breakfast places with all these facts. And then at lunchtime, this is their big concept, they put up a flag, which I paid for, that said Food for Thought, Political Theory Project. And anyone who wanted to could pick up their tray with their fact, come sit down at this table, and have a robust conversation about the fact and what the facts meant. Just one more that I'll mention, because this is actually my favorite one. They came to me with the idea of what they called Socratic Conversations. That's a good label, so I'm predisposed to it. And the idea of the Socratic Conversations was this. They had T-shirts made that said Socratic Conversations on them, Political Theory Project, and one said for and one said against. You can see where this is going, right? And their concept was to hang outside the library in pairs of two and to stop individual students and say, we want to engage you in a debate about whatever, abortion. And I'm going to argue for it, and he's going to argue against it, and then you're going to reply. So for would give the talk, against would give the talk, the kid would go, I have a physics exam tomorrow, and I don't know who you are, and I'm out of here. But anyway, but along the things they did that didn't work really well, they did lots of things that did work really well. But the important thing was they were feeling a sense of ownership, feeling a sense that people can have at every age, that they're in an institution. Universities are always in a process of becoming. It's not the case that Brown is set in stone to be Brown, the loony, sometimes they just, whatever, the lefty cousin of the Ivy League. I love Brown, so I can say that. I do love Brown. But it's like one step away from being in the attic in terms of the, but universities, all universities, like all institutions, are constantly in a state of becoming. And that means when young people are out of place, and so too with faculty, when we're there, a story is being told about that institution while we're there. And those of us who are at the institution, students and faculty alike, are part of that story whether we like it or not. The story is being told, it's being written by what we do and what we don't do. If you feel that way and you have a sense for the possibility of changing the thing for the better, of improving it, contributing to it, then you feel empowered when you realize that. You realize that, in fact, you're part of a story, like it or not, so why not stand up and actually be part of the story? Why not eventually, years later, browse some YouTube thing, it's on YouTube, and come across some professor making fun of the idea that he told you was such a great idea 20 years before when you were doing it. Sorry, food for thought people. Sorry, Socratic dialogues people. But the big thing we did was have these thing called Janus Lectures that I mentioned before. And the concept was that group, that diverse group, would they would choose 2 speakers to come to Brown to give a talk in a very special way. And they would usually make the choice the year in advance. They knew that they'd bring me their proposal. And if the whole group by consensus, it always had to be consensus. I didn't want a democratic situation where the majority is going to swamp out. I want a true consensus among them as peers on suggested topics and suggested speakers for the following year's events. And we put on events with, to our initial surprise, great success. The first event we had was on justice, gender, and the American dream. We pitted Catherine McKinnon, who's a very well-known sort of Marxist feminist legal scholar, first woman to get tenure at Michigan, a brilliant legal scholar. And we pitted her with Harvey Mansfield, who some of you may know is sort of for many years, the campus conservative at Harvard, who had actually 2 years before we had him, had written a book called On Manliness, in which he said America is losing its cojones, and the reason why and the culprit, the thief, were the feminists. So here we had, maybe America's most prominent feminist with a person who's just written a book talking about, surgical stuff. And then that event, they had an incredible exchange. They'd actually never met before or argued before. They did this incredible thing. And I met with the students the next day to debrief. And they said to me, we all sat there thinking, okay, we drew a big crowd, put on an incredible show, but we knew there was something fundamentally wrong with the event. Something just messed up about it. And what we realized was messed up about it was, it didn't really reflect our deep values. Because what it did was basically, it was a debate. It was a show. It was a gladiatorial combat. It was fun and it was exciting, but it didn't do what we wanted to do, which is to emphasize the point that what you inherit from the previous generation is not what's important. It's only important, inheritance is important only insofar as it's uploaded by the people in those seats in the room watching, and they're given a full opportunity to think for themselves what they think about the best of the previous generation's thinking from different perspectives. So we started changing the rules. And we did different kinds of rules, different times to different groups of students, but among the rules we tried were things like, they tried this one for a while. People would come, they'd each speak, and then they were not allowed to speak to each other. I knew it was a bad idea, but I let them do it anyway. So they'd give a talk, and then be silent to each other, and then the students would ask questions. But the spirit was true. The spirit was good. They're onto something. They're trying to set up an environment where the students would think of themselves as the stars. And so we changed the rules so that however long the two speakers spoke, we'd get up with a very visible clock, and we'd say they spoke for whatever it was, 40 minutes. Now we're going to do 40 minutes, same amount of time they spoke for you guys to do the important part, which is to get behind the microphones and ask the questions that you ask. We developed other things to signal to the people what we wanted out of the events. One of the things we came up with is something called the Hardball Question Prize. And the Hardball Question Prize is literally a baseball on top of a trophy that's awarded to whichever student asks a question that best disrupts the premises of one or both of the speakers, right? So we don't count. I didn't give up. I didn't care a fig who asked the best question. But the point of the prize, as the point of many prizes, is to signal to the whole group why we're there, what we're assembled for. I also went to Walmart one day, and and walked into the back to the sporting goods section and got a softball, which I scrawled on with a magic marker, softball question prize. And I did that having in mind a former graduate student of mine who, when Hillary Clinton was on campus at a big event, she stood up on her chair and started her question by saying, given that George Bush stole the election, and then she asked her question. And so we would wave the softball at these, 500 kids now, but we were trying to grow these big groups, wave the softball and say, and by the way, you can win the prize, the hardball prize, but just be aware. If you signal whose team you're on in the introduction or in any part of your question, you are in dire danger of being ritually humiliated in front of 500 of your peers with a softball prize. Among the speakers we had, though, people like we had a debate on all kinds of controversial topics, the kind of topics that you would think would be hard to put on a Brown. But we never had a single event disrupted. So we had an event, for example, on U.S. support for Israel. And we brought in Noam Chomsky, because he'd bring the people, which was always big for us. And we paired him with Ambassador Dennis Ross, who has a very different view about America's view of Israel. We had one there was a big issue at the time, at 1 year, with about should Brown divest from coal. So we put on a big event with that. We brought in Bill McKibben, who some of you may know was the national leader of this big student group, this big student movement, to protest universities until they will finally divest from coal. So we brought in their superstar. We brought in like the person they couldn't believe we were bringing in, like Bill McKibben, to come to Brown to actually, talk about why. And Brown's Board of Trustees was going to meet 2 weeks later to actually have the vote. And they said, oh my God, they're actually bringing Bill McKibben in to kick their to kick their bottoms and show them why they should divest. And we paired him with some guy who, he was the CEO of Duke Energy, Jim Rogers, who was really trying to be a really smart, interesting person, and had a conversation about it. Because our thought was, as always with us, we're trying to elevate the level of conversation on the campus. We're not trying to get a certain outcome. The outcome's going to be what the outcome's going to be. but we're going to sort of elevate. I'm going to say one, I'll give you one more example, then I'll go to my fourth point, which will be briefer, but it's the important one. I'll just mention this one other thing that I think you'll find interesting. I said we never had an event disrupted. That's in part because by having that student group structured that way, with the different groups involved, it meant that we had someone in the room in all the groups who are most likely to disrupt the events. What's more, because we had student members in the rooms the year before the events happened, we had people in those groups now who were party to the conversation with our fellow students about why we were choosing that particular topic and why we were choosing those particular speakers. What that did, I think it put some pressure on the internal structures and dynamics of those groups, even the most radical versions of those groups. Because now you've got some people in that room who've having this regular experience with other students who they wouldn't normally be talking with about a different set of ideas about Brown, about what the university could be, and what it should be. And the fact that you have people in those rooms would affect the way those organizations work and affected whether they were actually just after their issue or are they after improving Brown. The same question I asked you, by the way, when I started this conversation, when I started this talk. Anyway, at one point, we also had lots of information about what was going on. And often, when we have these events, students would come to me and say, look, you can't have X come to campus. And I would say, yeah, we're bringing X, sorry. And then they'd come back and say, you really can't have X coming to campus. We're going to, shut them down. Go, you know what? We're bringing X to campus. Don't shut them down. We'd find ways to undercut them. But one time, we were having an event on enhanced interrogation, the torture. And it was at a time when people were very worked up about this issue. And I was a little bit worried about it when the students came to me and said they wanted to do that one. And they wanted to have John Yoo, who was the person who wrote the torture memo, saying that yes, the president has the power to authorize enhanced interrogation. And we paired him with Larry Alexander, who was the executive director of Amnesty International. Again, their star, right? So we bring in, and there were kids came in lined up with their, Amnesty International t-shirts on to cheer for their team. But in advance of that event, we started getting reliable information that this one was going to be shouted down. There was protests organized for the outside of the event, and we had plans for that. We had 2 cop cars, one going one way and the one, we were on the back. We had that routine going from the outside of people. But the worrying thing to us was they were going to shout them down in the room. And we had pretty specific information what they were going to do. They were sending a group in with backpacks to go in the upper balconies. They were going to have 3 people down below. They were going to rush the stage. They're going to release the stuff on the top, and it was going to be a disaster. They're going to blow the whole thing up. I remember sitting with my group of my co-conspirators, undergrads and 2 faculty members, thinking to ourselves, okay, the event's tonight, what can we do? We tried all our usual diffusing tricks, which I'd done many times before, but we'd run out of tricks, and they were going to certainly shut this event down. And then, just one thing, this amazing young woman, her name is Andrea Matthews, tiny little quiet Asian woman who is strong as could be, went on to Harvard Law School and now is doing really cool stuff. But anyway, Andrea Matthews, who I think was a sophomore then, she said, what if I did it? I said, what? What do you mean? What do you do? And she said, what if instead of having me, a professor, or any of my colleagues go up to introduce the speakers and run the Q&A, which we'd always done in the past for a whole bunch of reasons, she said, what if no one went near the stage except her and the 2 speakers? Do we think they would still shut them down if we made her so vulnerable in that way? And she was willing to do it. So we did all this misdirection stuff, for the people outside and all the people chanting and all that junk. That we watched the people come in with their backpacks on cue. They went up and took their spots on cue. They had the 3. We were tracking them all. I was sitting in the audience now. And then at the key moment, from behind the stage, Andrea Matthews came out, little person, with John Yoo and Larry Alexander. And she quietly went up to the podium and just gave this brilliant talk about what Brown was. Not what you guys think Brown is, but what we think Brown should be. And she sort of spoke in a quiet way. She spoke into being a conception of the university that was so powerful that the students didn't know what to do. And the speakers both spoke, and the people upstairs had their backpacks, and you watched them leave after the event with their backpacks still with them. And that was just something that was kind of an interesting moment that I just wanted to share with you. What's that all about? What does that matter to you? This is the part that matters to you. Okay. I'm sorry, I talked for so long. Can someone make this thing work again? Yeah, so this way. Thank you. I'll keep it moving now. So I mentioned that to make change happen on a university campus, the key is the faculty. And I decided in January to leave my very wordy endowed chair at Brown. It's one of Brown's oldest chairs. I decided to leave that chair because I see I was recruited to become the first president of this organization that was started by my friend Jonathan Haidt called Heterodox Academy. Some of you may know John Haidt's work, The Coddling of the American Mind, for example. And John and I have been friends for years, and I would often go to New York when I was fundraising for my center. And I would usually, after my fundraising stuff, I'd go down to Washington Square, and John and I would walk around and just talk ideas together about these things. And John had built this organization, but it had reached a kind of a plateau, and the question was, could it actually come alive and do something interesting? And what the pitch to me was, we have 5,000 faculty members, but we're not sure what to do with them. And I thought to myself, 5,000 faculty members, all individuals. They're all anonymous, by the way, for a bunch of reasons. Their professors are scared. Not really, but I'll say, but let's just start with the idea that they're scared. But for a bunch of reasons, there are 500 anonymous professors. And I thought to myself, well, maybe this thing I did at Brown is a model that could be scaled up and replicated across the country, or even beyond the country. And how could you do that? Well, you need to start activating the faculty. I sort of think of universities as like gardens for curiosity. And I have a blog post if any of you are interested. I'm sure is it up here? Oh, really? There's a blog, well, that's not very helpful. I have a blog post on Hedox Academy blog called Curiosity U about this stone and a tree at Brown. And my idea is that the university is like, in some sense, a garden for curiosity. It's a place where we go. It's a very special place, separated from the ordinary run of politics and society. It's a place where we can study about politics, but we shouldn't just be doing politics when we're there. It's a time, and it should be a time and a place for reflection on deeper things, a very special place, especially within a free society. And that the students, as I said, are like these quadrennial plants. You need to have walls around the garden so the ordinary run of politics is not allowed to wash across the campus, whether from the left or from the right. I think that's a really worrying thing when ordinary tricks of politics start coming onto a campus. And then the trees on the garden are something like the great disciplines, with all their slow growth and their branches and all the things that disciplines do. Well, they're there for the long term. And the professors, we professors, we're eccentrics. We're weird creatures. And we're like the gardeners. We're like the gardeners who should be out in the garden, working on the trees, tending to them, being aware of the flowers, not stepping on them, and holding and patching up the walls when politics starts to come in. The gardeners of my generation, I think, for a variety of reasons, have tended to fall asleep. They're in the gardening shed. God love them. They have their gloves. They tinker. And I thought to myself, well, do they have to be that way? Maybe what I experienced at Brown and my colleagues experienced at Brown, the idea about what I said to the students about all institutions being in a process of becoming, maybe that is true about professors too. Maybe professors, especially now in this era, especially after the last few years, maybe professors now too could be encouraged to come out from their gardening sheds and to do things on their campuses. And Heterodox Academy, what do I have on here? Oh, this. I was going to talk about you guys, Yale. I'm going to let that go. We can talk about Yale if you want later. So Hedox Academy has this mission. It's really to improve the culture of teaching and the culture of research through these three values: open inquiry, viewpoint diversity, and constructive disagreement. Those values, by the way, as I look at those values, I do political philosophy. When I see those three values, I see norms for university life. The first one, open inquiry, is something like curiosity. It's something like letting your mind go where it wants to go, because your mind just wonders what's out there, what else could be. A certain impatience with the given, that sort of familiar, I think, very human attribute. Viewpoint diversity means seeing the world from different perspectives. It started off at HXA with left versus right ideologically. I like to think of it in broader ways. I think religious paradigms are extremely important ways of seeing and understanding the world, that it can bring a lot to a conversation. I think racial histories are really important for people. They want to bring this in and enrich the conversations. I think that a lot of obvious things, but for example, things that are worth saying. I think that the arrival of women at great elite universities was an incredibly important step forward for people who actually care about diversity of thinking. Sometime within HXA, people talk about these three values, and they talk about, well, I remember the good old days. My friends and I would sit around the dorms talking freely, and anyone would say anything they wanted forever, deep into the night. I said, yeah, you're all white males of a certain class, and some of you probably weren't comfortable with Jews in the room. If you have these three norms, and then you can add more dimensions of diversity, deepen the diversity, you can get a deeper form of heterodoxy, which we should be working towards, I think, very seriously. But when I see those three norms, open inquiry, viewpoint diversity, and constructive disagreement, which is something like democracy, I see those three norms as sort of political norms for a free society. Open inquiry is like individual rights. It's the idea of individual freedom of speech and association. Viewpoint diversity is something like the idea of toleration, the idea that there's different views and we're going to agree to live together despite those differences. And indeed, in the liberal tradition, the key idea from the Scottish Enlightenment is that from Aristotle forward, we had the idea to move forward in society, you need to get moral agreement across the whole society first. Those beautiful Scots, David Hume, Smith, these people, they said, wait a minute, maybe there's a new form of social organization where precisely by our disagreements, precisely by our differences of opinion, our differences of evaluation, with the right institutions, we can all pursue our own aims better, just insofar as you pursue your aims more vigorously than I can. So when you do well, you, Steve Jobs, do your thing in the world, if the rules are set up the right way, it can redound in such a way that I can pursue my own different form of the good life even better than I could have before. And then the last one's the big one, constructive disagreement, which means listening. It means listening well to people, which is hard to do. It's hard to listen to people when you don't agree with them. It's a well-known phenomenon. I think constructive disagreement is something like a moral ideal that, in my experience, can stir young people. Constructive disagreement, as I understand it, is a political principle that's something like a belief in social progress. Not progress that you run people over with a tank to achieve. That's merely political progress. I mean democratic moral progress, a kind of a commitment to a way of doing politics together where we see progress as something that takes more time. It takes more work. It's not just a slogan here or a tank there. It's actually an engagement with people who don't see the way the world you do, in a way where you learn from them and they learn from you. And together, through time, there'll be some people on the fringes will drop off, but through time, we move forward together as a society precisely because we bound ourselves to this moral ideal of convincing one another. So that's these principles. Just stuff about us. There's 5,000 of us. There's 5,500 now. I should mention that when I took over, my first official act was to require that all the professors be named. I thought to myself, I'm taking the job because I want to activate them. I want to do something with these people. But if they're anonymous, if they're not being asked to stand up just this little bit, right? Just this much, hi, my name, then are they going to do the things I want them to do down the road? Probably not. And I was talking with a friend when I was trying to make this, I was about to take over as a president, leaving my flipping job. My wife is like, really? I was trying to decide whether to do this, and my wife and I were having dinner with a friend who's a long-term professor at Harvard in a non-tenured position. And this friend, when I told her I have this idea, I'm going to require, she's an HXA member, and she's in this non-tenured position. She's an excellent teacher. And I said to her, I have this great idea. I'm going to activate the members, including you, and I'm going to make you public from now on. And she said, don't do it. She said, if you activate me and do this to me, I'm going to have to drop out of the academy. Not because the ideals we stand for, those 3 principles, are so like bad. They're kind of boring, right? I mean, I hope. But just because if you're known to be part of a group that would sign up for that and stand up for that, maybe you're a person that should be watched. But then she told me, and I actually sat at dinner watching her do this thing, she had a second thought. And the second thought was, because of this new rule, she's now going to find out something she always wondered about. Who else at Harvard is a member? And I'll give you something. It turns out that Harvard's a place where HXA has the most members. No offense, Yaleys. And look at Brown. Come on, really, people? But there you are, right? 23. 23 Yale professors. That's a lot of power. That's a lot of firepower. There's intellectual firepower. There's campaigns yet to come. Use your hashtag use your tenure. There's really power. If you think about just looking across these groups, right? Like, we have, when I announced that rule, by the way, when we announced that rule, we sent emails around to our members saying, hey, we're going to start identifying you on Monday. You know, we lost, I think we lost 100 the first day. And I was okay with that. I said, well, you know, a little melt, it's natural. Lost 200 the second day. And I was like, yeah, you know, it's probably fine. Lost 300 the next day. I didn't sleep a whole lot. My wife thought to herself, oh, he's going to have to try to come back on his hands and knees to Brown. and then the bleeding stopped. So we dipped below 5,000 for a while, and the bleeding stopped. And then it started growing again. Now we're up around 5,500, up from where we dropped to. But anyway, so what I want to tell you about, so this is our HXA way. Our approach, so we work closely with FIRE. Greg Lukianov of FIRE is a close friend of mine. FIRE is a group, as many of you know, that is very interested in defending free speech rights across America's campuses. They do incredibly important work of what I think of as fighting bad things. And there are bad things that need to be fought. My approach at Brown was always different. In the early years of Brown, I would fight some bad things, and they would beat me up and put posters around the campus, I'm afraid to say, calling me a racist. They would do things when I would fight the bad things by like speaking out against things that I thought were bad, like find my car and do stuff to it. So, you know, things would happen when I was in my early years fighting bad things. And I sort of realized, you probably get the tone of it already from what I've been saying, that another way to think about going about improving a place is by truly loving it and by building good things. So FIRE and HXA were kind of working together in this kind of across their country. They're there to fight bad things, which is an incredibly important step. But then the question still remains, who's going to build the good things? Brown, for example, currently has a green light from FIRE. Brown is a place of great freedom of political conversation. You can't walk around a corner at Brown without walking into someone having a political conversation. You can't bump into a table on the Brown Green without someone handing you a flyer with some political thing about it. Brown is awash with political conversations. If you ask people at Brown, and the Wall Street Journal did this recently as part of a wider survey, do you feel comfortable expressing your political ideas? Kids at Brown say, yeah, we do. It's one of the most free places in the country for this. Well, if you all think roughly the same thing, then you probably are going to feel pretty free talking about the things that you know with a pretty good likelihood. People, I mean, I love Brown, like I said, and it's not all that, but there is an element of Brown that is like that. That's part of why Brown has a reputation that it does in that respect. But what we need to have is someone working on the culture. And now I'm going to come to the last bit. This is the fourth point. I'll do it very briefly. So at HXA, what I'm doing is I've started my first step, which is to ask the professors to identify themselves or to be identified. And what we're going to start this fall, I'm going to start now bringing them together into communities. So currently we have a bunch of online communities. We're all over the world. We have some of the communities that we have are geographically based. So we have an HXA faculty group, California. So if you're a professor in California, anywhere, you can go online, get workshops, talk to like-minded people, talk about the problems you're facing in your university, share insights with super intelligent people about what they could do to fight back to make it better. We have geographical ones that are like, we have HXA Sweden, we have HXA New Zealand for some reason, no offense to New Zealand, HXA New York. We also have, interestingly, disciplinary groups, so HXA Classics. If you're a classicist anywhere in the world, you can go online, join our group, come to our workshops, get our toolkits, work on things to help make your discipline, see what's happening in your discipline, share information on the latest threats, about better ways to defend classics, for example, STEM. Sorry, I love ice. There's a whole, you didn't need to know that, but I do love ice. There's a whole bunch of these online communities, and my thought was, well, what about the ones that matter? What about the communities on the campuses? What if you could take that list? What if you could take that list, which is much, it goes longer, right? And start bringing together, I don't know, how about those 23? How about 10 of them? How about 5 of them to start? What if you could start bringing people together on communities and start creating what I'm going to call HX campus communities? What if you could start bringing people together, which we're going to start doing next fall? We're going to in the fall, we're going to start a pilot program. Depending on our funding, we're going to do 5 or 10. I want to do 10, but we're going to do some number of pilot schools, in which we're going to run an application process. We have a big annual conference. We're meeting in Denver next week. I'm probably going to announce this thing. Camera. And we're going to have an application process. Just send out to our members. Would you like to start a campus community for your fellow Yale professors who care about these 3 values on your campus? And we're going to have an application process that's going to include things like, what's the climate? What's the situation on your campus? How bad's the situation from the perspective of our values? How promising is the situation from the perspective of your values? Some presidents, as you probably know, I'm spending now a lot of time talking to people that I didn't used to hang out and talk with, like university presidents. And I'm interested, there's a number of university presidents who are telling me, at least, that they want to start branding their school and differentiating their school by taking this turn and really trying to think through, how do we do inclusion seriously in ways that retain these incredibly important values that seem to have been lost in so many places? There are presidents who say they want to do it. So we're going to have an application process. It's also going to include an important piece about alums. Which schools do we think are likely to be supported by alums when it comes to these kinds of initiatives? And the communities are going to start meeting. We're going to select them through the fall and start organizing the team leaders with certain workshops, because if you're going to be successful at this, you have to have the right people be the face of the organization, or the right combination of people. If you just have some really disgruntled, angry, frankly, conservative professor, who everyone knows is the angry, disgruntled, conservative professor, trying to bring harmony and growth and energy to a campus, maybe, probably not. It'd be fun, but again, that's the point I made at the very beginning, stick them in the eye. No. Can you find a way to train them up and make them do things? So what I wanted to tell you about is that HXA is this organization that exists. We work closely with FIRE, that we have a different approach. Ours is a slower, I think more intellectualized, less legalistic, a slower approach. God knows we have to have FIRE doing what they do. I think we also have to have HXA doing what we do. And the thing that I thought you'd find of interest is that your professors at Yale, the 23, hopefully there'll be more than 23 by fall, I'm working on it, your 23 people are all going to get an invitation like everybody else to say, would you be interested in creating a campus community at Yale? Would you like Yale to be one of the places where we have one of our pilot programs? And we start building this thing. When you build the thing, the super important bit is you have to build a faculty group of diverse, who actually understand the arguments that are going on in the academy better than the people who are currently winning most of the arguments. We have resources around HXA. John Haidt and I we're building a think group around us in New York to try to, because I think people who care for free expression have been losing the arguments for about 20 years now. I do political philosophy. I would like to say that the free speech people are winning the moral arguments. They're not. Just like I would like to say that the limited government people are winning those moral arguments, but they're not. But the free speech people actually could win them if given the right resources. We need to provide the resources to our members, and you need to have a faculty group, and then something like a student group like I described at Brown, and then you have to have this crucial thing, an unassailable public platform to project your views across the whole campus. No one will even know at first what it is about these events that we'll be putting on. We're going to call them Heterodox Conversations. They're going to start happening, the first wave, in the fall of the year after the first year. When people attend those events, they're not even going to fully realize what's going on. They're not going to quite see HXA value. We'll probably hand out literature, but they won't be like on the face of the event. What they'll be seeing is something that they don't normally experience. And they'll be detecting something unusually going on in this room, which in some interesting way is all about them, the people in the audience. And they'll be detecting a difference between that experience and the experience that unfortunately so many of them are experiencing currently. And we'll hold it up as kind of a living model, unassailable because the attacks will come. That goes with the territory. But if it's built up from a way of love, if you build that up with genuine clarity of heart and a concern for the students foremost in your mind, then that structure will have a certain attraction to people that will make it very hard to attack, especially if you have some formal features like it being from the place, built by faculty who are part of that university, not outsiders coming in, but actually people from that place, building it their own way, distinctly for that. We have toolkits that they're going to be adjusting to the conditions of their own university. We're going to have community colleges as well as elite schools. And that's the plan for the fall, for next year. And I've talked way longer than I wanted to, but I'm sorry, than I planned to. I guess I wanted to, so I did. But if there's time can we talk? Yeah, please. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Professor Tamazi. I just have a.
Thanks for pronouncing my name right.
I'm an Italianist, so obviously.
You didn't get the Tamazi's business.
I just have a question because you mentioned how FIRE and Heterodox Academy kind of are complementary to each other.
Yeah.
But what about a third category, a category that I've witnessed again and again happening in front of my own eyes, which are things that cannot really be put into a legal category that can be taken legal action against, but are just, for the lack of a better word, that are cruel. Right?
That are cruel?
Cruel, right? What I see happening again and again, which is why I'm somewhat pessimistic about what you are proposing right now, is just this campus culture of cruelty, which every day is becoming stronger and stronger, like I've seen with my own eyes, right? People, my friends, who were ruthlessly mocked for marrying the wrong people, right? Like marriage is like a thing, like if I marry someone, people shouldn't mock me because I married this person. Now that is opening up to become a new area of mockery, right? Like people are just ruthless, right? Like a lot of these people, I've seen tenured professors at Yale starting campaigns against young women who are as young as their daughters, right? Ruthlessly attacking these people, starting campaigns online. So I hope you can give me a reason to be more optimistic about whether your platform is going to be able to hold itself together against this culture of cruelty, which this is what really concerns me.
Yeah, and by culture of cruelty, I'm not fully tracking it. Is it cruelty meted out to people who diverge for people who commit heresies? Do you want to add to it? The person in front? Did you want? Yeah.
I kind of haven't answered
Yeah.
to that.
Oh, hey, I'm all for it. I don't, so she's trying to.
Hi, my name is Megan. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Hi. Thank you so much
My
for
pleasure.
this talk.
My pleasure.
One of the things that I find is what you're discussing about that cruelty absolutely is there. But at the same time, I founded some councils at Yale through the medical school, and some of the people that are already doing this work, they're so isolated.
Yep.
I tend to be a concierge, so I would love some of the people that are already doing the work in addition to the 23 that are up there, that someone like you would have access to people like them so that they can hear real time on the ground
Right.
what things specifically need to be addressed.
Yeah, good.
Because at the hospital, they do that. They do take into consideration these real-time things and not just what they think things are. Because
Yeah.
there's a false positive and there are false negatives.
Nice. Yeah, thank you. Thanks. I'll just add one little piece that there's the structure that I'm building at HXA is going to be a group in the city. It's the city campus of people, sort of a brain who works on these problems. And then there's going to be the network of campus communities. We're going to start with 10, say, but we're going to start scaling up pretty fast. So I'm building the model to be scalable. And the idea is to get information out from all those nodes coming in on a regular basis. What are the problems you're facing at your school? And some of the problems are theoretical ones, like good arguments against free speech that need to be countered, or the strong arguments, seemingly persuasive arguments against free speech that need to be countered. But there's also very practical things about how to change institutional structures and norms. Because you can't just talk about ideas all the time and try to win the battle of ideas in hearts and minds. I think you really need at some point to start doing developing what I call actionable fellowship. The kind of fellowship that comes when professors, for example, and students work together to actually make make institutional changes at the place where they are, so that institutions will support the right virtues. So you have to change things, not just change words. You have to change institutions. I'm sorry, did you?
Thank you so much. Thank you for your talk. I really appreciated it. I'm curious. So I'm starting a PhD this fall, and I think I'm
What field?
History. So I'm doing
Where?
Columbia.
Cool.
Yeah. So I'm doing a 19th century Native American history.
Cool.
But I'm curious. You were talking about gardeners falling asleep, especially in your generation. And I've definitely seen a lot of gardeners in a lot of different, areas of life asleep of late, I think.
Yeah.
And I'm curious what advice you would give for not falling asleep. What caffeine or sleep patterns, as it were, would you point me toward so that I don't fall asleep?
You mean as a graduate student?
Yes, as a graduate student, and then moving towards,
So,
becoming a faculty member if I, get really lucky.
yeah, I'm not sure quite how to answer that, but I guess I'll just say that you may be aware, and if not, you should be aware that a lot of survey data suggests that graduate students are the hardest cases in terms of these values and norms. So the people who are most likely to say that it's sometimes appropriate to shout down a college speaker you disagree with are graduate students. So you're entering a tough crowd. What was the specific question? Well, don't fall asleep.
There are a lot of the gardeners who have fallen asleep.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, what advice would you give for not falling asleep?
Yeah. But by fall asleep, I mean something like, something kind of functionally specific. I mean, falling asleep from the role that professors once upon a time naturally thought was theirs, which is actually to care for the university. And for a variety of reasons, to do with bureaucratization and also, I think, to do with disciplinary specialization, professors have gotten into the habit of letting other people drive the bus. And there's an important role for professors yet to be played on college campuses, especially regarding these issues. And my own experience is that, I taught at Brown for 26 years, and my own experience from being there and other places where I spent time is that we're kind of in a moment now where a lot of professors are really starting to think that unless they do something, the universities are not going to be the places that they ever thought that they want them to be ever again. And I can give you reasons why I think professors think that, but that's what I'm sensing. It's kind of what I'm betting on, frankly, that there's a kind of turning that not just among conservatives who've always seen the imbalance and always been so aware of those things, but among good-thinking people, broad-minded people on the left too, who believe in that ideal that I talked about, the ideal of democracy, the idea that we actually should be a society, if we can get there again in some way, that tries to move forward together. That we do think of leadership as about building bridges, not just about stomping the enemy. And that's an idea that professors can help reinvigorate. Yeah, please. If we organize and if we equip them the right way.
Well, thank you. And my question just goes back to the comment you made a few moments ago about institutional change.
Yeah.
what are the most important types of institutional changes that you want to foster? As somebody I'm not an academic, so from the outside, I would have thought that things like how universities go about making hiring and tenure decisions would be important, because it's great to have a good climate of intellectual diversity, but if I think I'm not going to get tenure, I probably am not going to pursue that academic career.
Yes. Yeah.
So that's the question.
Yeah. So there's a whole, we have whole menus of institutional options for change. And one of the things that I've learned, I mean, this is a platitude from social change theory, but it's something I've learned from my own experience in the university context. Universities, like most institutions, have sort of soft material, soft flesh, and they've got sort of rigid stuff, bones. And at Brown, I ran the center for 17 years. And in the early years, I was all about the soft stuff. I was all about culture, temperature, having this platform be this powerful thing that would be a standing challenge to people who think that you should not have diverse viewpoints on campus. I mean, having that out there, right, just as a standing challenge. Why are hundreds and hundreds of people coming to that? And then you want to tell people in your classroom it's wrong to listen to other viewpoints that are unlike your own. People actually say this in college campuses. It's a standing challenge to that. Sorry, I lost my train. What did you say? Oh, yeah. Right. And then I got involved with the idea about trying to diversify the faculty, and I got some positions and I did some hiring, and I found that was a whole other world. I think I hope in the long run, when I recover from those experiences of the hirings that I went through, I'll be glad I did it. I'm not there yet. So, but the important point from the perspective of HXA and what we're trying to do over the next 5 years is I think that distinguishing the hard stuff from the softer stuff is really important. To get professors to move and start moving universities in the right direction, you've got to eventually get to that hard stuff. But you don't do that first. You have to be really, really mindful about when you do that, because it can blow up in all kinds of ways. There's structural reasons you can't make a move. It can happen over time, but changing the climate does a lot in this way. I'll let you steer.
Time for one or two quick questions.
Do you happen to know how many university presidents are members of HSA?
I think there are 7 who are members, which is kind of striking, by the way,
So,
because they don't like to join things for obvious reasons. No, they don't for obvious reasons.
but it seems to me if they were to set a policy of openness of expression throughout their institution, that would give you an easier road to make this happen.
So one of the criteria we're going to be looking at is who the president is and what their view is. But
We first heard of your organization at Chapman,
right.
and the president is one of the members, and
Yes.
so are many of the professors.
Yeah, Chapman's a great place.
And so we're supporting their
Good.
presidential series.
Good, fabulous. I guess I would just say that when I talk about the hard structure of an institution, like, for example, universities, the structure is hard in a way. But to be hard doesn't just mean that you need to have a czar to change it. Hard means it won't change even with a czar. So presidents, for example, can say, I want to have viewpoint diversity on a college campus. But the way things are structured is there's departments that have a lot of autonomy within the university. They make the hiring decisions with a bunch of some oversight. But you have to get key voting blocks happening within departmental structures. And you can have a university president who wants to do all kinds of stuff. But the way universities are structured, most of them at least, it's a hard block.
One more question.
Thank you, Lauren. And I just wonder if you would comment on what looks to me like a loyalty oath movement that is sweeping colleges, apparently with the intent of wiping out the last remnants of dissent. And I'm thinking of things like you want to apply to work here, how about a diversity statement? Or how about you have to do a land acknowledgement? Or I mean, I could think of others, but those are probably the two most prominent examples. And then when you look, we have 23 people at Yale. Okay, there's about 1,000 people on the faculty, so that's 2%. Are those senior people, and have they made it so no junior person can get in anymore, and therefore the last remnants of dissent are going to be wiped out?
I like that grim note. I mean, because, remember, I'm from Brown. So, really? That's all you guys got? What was the first part of what you said?
Loyalty.
Oh, yeah. It's interesting. The loyalty oaths are one of the things, I'll use your term. The loyalty oaths are one of the interesting things that's driving professors to wake up and start stirring from their sheds. Other things you might find interesting, one of my favorite ones, is you may know that every year, professors don't make a lot of money. Do you know that? If you gave Yale more, they still won't make more, so anyway, whatever. But professors, we do this thing every year, typically, where you write a report about your progress in the previous year, and your pay raise is based on it. And forever, it's been three-part self-evaluation. And different universities rank these things, these three categories in different ways. How was your research over the past year? What'd you publish? How'd you do for research? How was your teaching? What'd you teach? What contributions did you make to the administration? Were you chair of some committee, blah, blah, blah. And that was it. And you write these, and we sit there, we professors in January, typing out our accomplishments, humble bragging as hard as we can to try to get our A's to go from 2% to 3%. Wow. So it's a serious thing for us. We're trying to get 3%, whatever, maybe 4, God knows. Recently, started in California, but now it's spreading east. Universities requiring a fourth thing. What have you done to fight racism over the past year? And this is now an increasingly common practice. And it's one of the many things, I think, that's showing people, what are universities going to become if we don't start standing up and start trying to find some productive, constructive way to make them be what they want to be. I'll say one last thing. Can I have just like 2 minutes? I'm going to say this even though it's not popular among my members. I think it's because I haven't found the right way to say it yet. So I'm going to say it again, probably wrong yet again, but I'm just going to try it anyway. I think there's 2 basic ways you can look at what's happening on campuses across America right now. One perspective is what I call the battlefield perspective. That's a perspective that most of you know. That's Christakis. That's the social justice thing. That's a perspective that I've worked at a lot of my career at Brown. It's a perspective in which we worry about the stuff you worry about, all these things we all know, right? There's a war going on. People shouting at each other down. There's cruelty. That's the battlefield perspective. There's another perspective that, and that perspective says something like this. And just hold on to this for a second if you don't. I don't want to upset you, but this is how I truly think about it in my heart. The other perspective is all of us are suffering together. And we're suffering together because though we can't see it, because we live in our little spaces, but though we can't see it, we, this generations, are part of a process of birth giving, bloody, messy, painful. The umbilical cord might be wrapped around the baby's neck right now. I don't know. But we're in the process, a process of giving birth to something that the world has never seen. Not in Bologna, not at Cambridge, not at Oxford, not at early Yale. Never seen a university that's truly diverse, truly inclusive in some deep way, which is simultaneously deeply committed to the open exploration of any idea. We haven't got there. There's been some, and just let me just qualify that. There have been some individual universities in time which I think came close to that or try. I think Berkeley, interestingly, in the 60s and 70s, was kind of doing this meritocratic thing before meritocracy was really something that was going on at Yale or Harvard. No offense. There was merit here, but there was other stuff too. But Berkeley was doing this thing where they were really picking people because they thought they had great potential. And they started generating this incredible power. And Berkeley became maybe the best university in the world for a while, driven that way. So I'm not saying it never existed. There's been a college that did it or tried to do it. Nor do I mean to say colleges have all been immoral and unjust and racist and blah, blah, blah forever, and finally we're going to get justice by progress. No, I don't mean that. I mean that as a whole university system, we've never seen this thing that that the possibility of which exists in front of us. what if we can, and I think in this perspective, HXA might be able to play a role, a small role, as something like a doula, trying to help us because we sincerely care. We're tapping into people who hopefully are not so embittered that they're lost. Hopefully they're people who can be activated to truly care again, to truly believe they can make the universities the great places they should be. And that's my hope for you, those of you who are back on the Yale campus. I know it's grim. I know there's lots of bad stuff going on. I do know. But I think the possibility that Yale might become a place like that, one of the leading places perhaps like that, is a pretty impressive thing that can happen in our lifetimes. So I'll close with that. Thank you.
Thank you again, John, and thanks everyone for joining us. And we'll have a reception, so please stick around and have a drink.